Hello and welcome to Tank Gym Academy. I'm Paul Gorman, and today I'm going to be talking to you as part of our intellectual nourishment series, education and programming for strength and conditioning, fitness, and sports medicine. And one of the topics we're going to cover today is a little bit about my perspective on how North American culture has evolved over the past several decades, looking back into the late 1800s. So again, this is part of our intellectual nourishment series, and you can find these at tankgym.com or on our YouTube page, Tank Gym. So as we look back, I think a big part of understanding our program design that we do today, we need to have a better understanding of where we came from, our cultural understanding about the past, and some of the influences from the mid and late 1800s moving forward will help us understand kind of how some of the sports and programming have designed today have evolved from those initial programs. So understanding our current culture, how do you currently define strength and conditioning and health and fitness? This is something that's really important. You need to be able to define this for yourself so that you can better define it for your clients. And when your clients come in, that should be something that you should help them identify and define, because everybody that comes in is going to have a different definition of what that means, whether we're building programs for individuals or teams. So how do we get here? What programs, exercises, activities do the majority of us use? If you ask 100 people, they're going to give you 100 different answers to the question of what's the best program, what's the exercise that's the best for this, what's the exercise that's best for that, what routine, what system is the best to get you in shape or get you ready for athletic competition. There are many answers to that. A little bit about my past history. I have an associate science in physical therapy, a Bachelor of Science in Exercise Science. I'm a PTA, ATC. I have my CSCS. I've successfully attended and completed the HKC, the RKC, the FMS certification, the SFMA, the Y-Balance test. I've also been privileged to be part of studies on many of the Y-Balance tests looking at injury prediction, both the upper and lower quarter, and implementing those in use with different populations. So we're going to start kind of in the mid to late 1880s, and we're going to talk about performing strongmen. There were many of them throughout the world, mostly in Europe, and then kind of migrated to North America. And if we look particularly at two individuals, we're going to look at Samson and Sandow. So in 1889, these guys started accusing each other of cheating and fixing their lifts. So they were performing strongmen in front of audiences, doing feats of strength. There's Eugene Sandow. So in 1889, at a performance where Samson and Cyclops they had nightly dares. They would dare individuals in the audience to hop up on stage and perform the lifts and the stunts that they were performing. And if they could do it, they would give them 500 British pounds. Sandow was in the audience. He jumped up on stage. He took the challenge and he did it. And that propelled some of the rivalry that we're going to see throughout the next generations as strongman performers come and go. In about 1893, Sandow started touring North America. Around 1897, he created the Institute of Physical Culture, which was an early gymnasium for strongmen and bodybuilders. Fast forward to 1977, and the Mr. Olympia statue was copied after him and simply known as the Sandow. So while we had these performers going around the country and going around the world performing and arguing and fighting about who's the best and claiming to be the strongest, a couple of them got together and decided, okay, we need to standardize this a little bit and have competition. So the Great Competition in 1901 could arguably be said to be the first strongman or bodybuilding contest that was organized and judged. Now we're going to take a look at different strongmen performers and some of their feats of strength throughout history and see how they kind of tie together to build the picture of where we're at today with programs. But Peter Krylov, the king of the kettlebell, many great feats there: the one-arm military press, the kettlebell crucifix, kettlebell juggling, one-handed anyhow, two-handed anyhows. Arthur Saxton into the early 1900s, was most well known for his bent press. So again, here's where we revisit some of the competition and rivalry between these performing strongmen. So we had Sampson and Sandow earlier, and now we fast forward and we have Saxton and Sandow. In 1889, Sandow claimed that no one could perform the lifts he was doing, and Arthur Saxton called out Sandow and said he couldn't perform the bent press the way he was doing it. Well, at one particular show, as Sandow was in the audience, unbeknownst to Saxton, he hopped up on stage and performed the lift. So again, Sandow and Saxton carrying on the rivalry that Sampson and Sandow had. And again, we start to see some litigation and some suits for libel and slander happening between these individuals and their claims of who's the strongest man in the world, who's performing the lifts correctly. A little bit of back history on the kettlebells. We think they've been around since about 1704 as far as written documentation in a Russian dictionary. And in 1913, Hercules, a Russian strengthening magazine, wrote that not a single sport develops our muscular strength and bodies as well as kettlebell athletics. Taking a look at W.A. Pullum, some early founding of culture and institutions to study. We're seeing this happen more. 1907, he founded Camberwell Lifting Club. 1911 through 15, he broke numerous world records and British records in weightlifting, and at one point was able to lift twice his body weight overhead. George Hackenschmidt, the Russian Lion, was a professional wrestler and heavyweight champion. He perfected and pioneered the bear hug. And here we're going to start to see something else that happens. Not only are we opening facilities to teach and train our techniques, now we're seeing these individuals and performers start to publish books on their techniques so that people can study their courses and learn how to do the feats that they were doing and obtain the physique that they were obtaining. And this becomes important as we go forward. This is where we start to learn about where everybody starts to learn from one another their techniques and tricks and tips. The Mighty Atom, 1893 through 1977, looking at his life. In the 20s and 30s, as a traveling performer and strongman, one of the many claims he was famous for was driving nails with his bare hands, but along with that was breaking chains wrapped around the chest, bending iron bars and horseshoes, biting nails in half. At one point, he laid down on a bed of nails and had a platform on top and then had a Dixieland band sit and play on his chest. So as we kind of look forward to 1914 as another stopping point in North American culture, we look at how the military defined health and fitness. What does that warrior athlete look like and need to look like, and how do we train them to be prepared for the activities there? And this is a good snapshot picture of what the vast majority of the physical culture and population at the time could do and what was thought they should be able to do. So in the manual of physical training, what we're looking at, the object of that manual is the objects of a course in physical training in the service aim to attain the development of the physical attributes of every individual to the fullest extent of his possibilities. That's what we should be striving for in all our program design. We should be getting our athletes to be the best athlete that they can be. No matter how we program that, that should be our goal. And as part of that goal, the scope of it is that each recipient in the course of training, we should not fail to develop harmoniously or at the liability of developing one portion of the body at the expense of another. So again, that well-roundedness from an athletic standpoint, we should develop the whole individual and not just the part. How did they go about that in the early 1900s in the military? Well, what they thought was you had setting up exercises. Generally, you would consider that to be calisthenics today. They had marching at quick time, double time, and running paces. They had dumbbells. Mind you, those were wooden dumbbells and typically very light, under 10 pounds, typically about 5 to 8 pound dumbbells. They had Indian club drills. They had their rifle drills and exercises. Climbing, they did ropes and walls. They had jumping, they had apparatus work, which again is pommel horses, ropes, rings, parallel bars, and even bars. You're going to see that here in just a minute. General gymnastic competitions, so floor competitions, general athletics, swimming, boxing, and wrestling. And typically that was Greco-Roman was their hand-to-hand combat training. As we see some of that here again, the ropes, rings, pommel horses, dumbbells, grappling, all those things were considered how we train for military readiness in the early 1900s. As we move forward again just a little bit, we're going to look at George Joel. He was very well known for his grip strength and his feats of strength with all the anvil work. And he's one of the earliest ones definitely to start to use the anvil for grip training and strength and conditioning in that strongman tradition. As a young man at age 11, he saw Eugene Sandow perform, and he decided, that was the thing he wanted to do, and he started training for that. Himself, he was an international gymnastic champion by age 15, and by 18 had won titles in feather, light, and welterweight boxing, and numerous other accomplishments in weightlifting. Some of the claims through the 20s and 30s, at weighing in 154 pounds, he was lifting 310 pounds overhead. Weighing at 176 pounds, a few years later, he lifted 340 pounds in a clean and jerk. And weighing in at 192 pounds, he became the first North American to one-arm swing more than his own body weight overhead. And he attributed all this to his grip strength. So again, we look at another strongman performer who starts his own school, his own technique, his own course, and writing books to teach this, and Molding a Mighty Grip was his course. So a lot of these books that we've talked about from these early performers are available in the U.S. Library of Congress and many other public libraries. You can check those out. Some of them you can also find digital copies. I encourage you to look at those and read those, and just kind of glean that information from that time frame, and then see how it fits in with our modern programming and have a better understanding of where some of that stuff comes from. George trained so hard and so long and so consistently over time that in 1956, at the age of 64, with a reporter on hand, he lifted 245-pound dumbbell overhead with one hand. Next, we're going to take a look at Charles Atlas. Many of you probably remember Charles Atlas from the back of comic books, not wanting to be the wimpy guy on the beach that gets sand kicked in the face. Charles Atlas was also heavily influenced by those that went before him and the creators of physical culture, specifically Sandow again. In 1921, he was dubbed the world's most perfectly developed man by the magazine Physical Culture. In 1922, Charles Atlas met Dr. Tilney, and they began to write his courses and marketed that program to many of the ads that you remember and saw. Hey, skinny, your ribs are showing. We don't want to be that guy on the beach. And even today, I think a lot of that is carried forward. So the thing with Charles Atlas is 3 different times the U.S. Federal Trade Commission investigated his claims, and his course in dynamic tension is what he called his program. It was isometrics. Okay, it was isometric training is what he based everything on. Each time they found and ruled in favor of Charles Atlas. The reason those investigations happened were false and disparaging comments made by other individuals in the strength and conditioning and strongman community that they didn't agree with or think that isometrics were possible, and that it was a fraud and a sham. In one particular statement that led to lawsuits, that led to some of the investigations, were in articles written by Mr. Hoffman, who made some of those statements about Atlas, referred to his program as Dynamic Hui, and Hoffman asserted that the use of dumbbells, barbells, and other apparatus was essential to attain great strength. So again, we'll talk a little bit about that again here in just a little bit. So there's a long-standing history of arguing who's right, who's wrong, and who does it better. There's a long-standing history of suing each other for verbal and written defamation, so libel and slander. Okay, and we'll see that continue as we go forward. And again, it helps define a little bit better why we have some of the sports and activities we do. Looking at Jack LaLanne again as we go forward a little bit more, it's really important to mention him and his contributions to the field of health and fitness and kind of how some of the things designed. He was credited in 1936 with opening what is considered the nation's first health and fitness club. And he noticed some trends that were happening, specifically in the 40s after the war. He noticed that cultural life had changed. No longer were we an agrarian society. We were mostly industrialized and had different jobs and different activities and different bodily movement habits that were occurring. And he noticed some of the changes in individuals. They were no longer able to perform some of the things that they had done previously. And his goal was to establish a way to help people to move well, to live well, to be better. And some of the things he came up with were to facilitate that because they could no longer move the way they should. So he thought he would help them. He invented leg extension machines, weight selector machines, cable and pulley machines, much of the things that you see in your high school, college, and then, you know, just health and fitness gyms throughout the country and have used for decades. A lot of those had their roots with some of the designs and implementation that Jack LaLanne brought to us. So next we move up to 1941, and this is where we're going to get ready to break off into our talk number 2. So this is part 1 ending, and we'll pick up in 1941 part number 2. But again, we've kind of set the foundation that there's a lot that's happened over the 50 or 60 year time span that we just talked about, where a lot of individuals disagreed on what the best way to train was, and it evolved. And they also disagreed, obviously, about who was the strongest, who was the best, and who did it well. And that plays a big part of how some of the things moved forward. Again, you can find the part 2 and part 3 of this lecture at tankgym.com or on our YouTube page at Tank Gym. Thank you.